Good morning. I wanted to come here and bring the youth here to share with y'all, our supporters. Y'all were so generous and helped us out so much to make this trip possible. So I just want to start by thanking you all. And we'll be sharing this morning, and we'll be again sharing on September 5th, a Wednesday night. We'll be hosting a meal and a presentation over in the Family Life Center. So please look out for announcements for that. And as you can see, there's several orange shirts, but we're not quite all here today. So in the coming weeks, as you see us in worship or as Wednesday nights begin, as you see us on Wednesday nights, please talk to us, ask us for stories, ask us to share. As you'll hear in just a few minutes here, we experienced a lot and we learned a lot. But anyway, on to our Houston trip. So earlier this summer, it was a warm June morning when 14 youth and 3 adults from here at Zion hopped on a bus to Houston, Texas. It all came together that morning. The months of planning, the fundraising, the prep meetings, the team building. The final event was just a short bus ride away. Well, the bus ride wasn't very short, but we were very excited for what we were about to experience. We knew we were headed to Houston to gather with other Lutheran youth for 5 days of learning, service, worship, and maybe even some fun. But whether we realized it or not, the gathering did much more than that. So when Nathan and I decided to share about the gathering this morning, I got really excited to come up here and tell you all about the theme, This Changes Everything from Houston, and share with you the message behind our Bible verse for the week, Ephesians 2, for by grace you have been saved through faith. This is not your own doing, it is the gift of God. I was excited to tell you about how grace changes everything. But despite the importance to our faith, that message just wouldn't quite deliver exactly what happened in Houston to us. So I thought maybe the numbers would show it. I got excited to bore you with the 31,242 registered participants and the 1,248 units of blood that were donated that week, the 437 people who grew out their hair for months or even years in order to donate it to children that had hair loss issues, the $260,000 given to World Hunger, or the $261,000 given in offering money on Sunday morning, the 40,000 children's books donated to Houston schools, or even the 125,000 plus service hours that we worked in Houston that week. Not us personally, all 30,000 of us. I'm sure our impact on the people of Houston will last for years to come, but it still doesn't quite show exactly what we experienced in Houston. It just doesn't show the impact the gathering had on us. It goes so much deeper. It goes to the heart of each of us who traveled there and returned here to Zion, reinvigorated, charged with the Holy Spirit, and ready to do God's work. So instead, this morning, I gathered several of our youth and one of our adults who traveled with us to share stories about the gathering and the mark it left on each of them. So I have Emerson Fight, Addie Phillips, Huntington Cotton, and Nora Jabali. And first, Emerson's going to come share with us, and you'll get to hear about each of their experiences.
When Walt first announced that we were going to Houston for the national gathering, I was excited. I mean, we were going somewhere with my youth group, worshiping God, doing mission work. Yeah, I mean, it was fun, but we've done that stuff before. But instead, this was 14 hours away and required a lot of fundraising. So I didn't really think much of it. I was kind of like, why couldn't we just go to Spruce Pine again and just do the same thing? But I had no idea how wrong I was. This and the impact that this was going to make on my life. When I think back at the trip, one of my favorite memories was the mass gatherings we did every night. We would all get together in the arena around 7 o'clock and sing worship songs and see speakers and got great messages. However, there were 31,000 people, so it was first come, first served seating. So the first night we got to the arena a little late and we cruised in and sat towards the nosebleed area. It was cool, but we were high up and I kind of felt far away from the stage and speakers. So the second night, Walt told us we could wait to sit on the floor seats, which were limited. However, that meant we had to sit out in the Houston heat with no shade for about 2 hours. And as we waited, sweating miserably, we had the opportunity to bond with other youth groups who had the same idea as us. We got to meet people from Minnesota, New York, Virginia, and got to talk to them and, say like, how cold is it where you are? Are you used to this? And we got to bond with them in really cool ways. And as we got in, we got the floor seats, and it was definitely worth the wait. We were in the middle of it all. I could do a 360 and see all 31,000 plus people, and it was absolutely breathtaking. And we were right by the stage. We could see the singers, and we could dance with everyone, and we were all so close to one another. And as the worship songs came on, we would put our arms around one another, and in those moments, I had my arms around people who I never met before. They were from all different backgrounds from all over the country, and along with my youth group around me. After the second night on the floor, we waited every single night to get those seats, and it was definitely worth it. My faith wasn't only relit by the empowering speakers, it was relit from the kindness and grace given to me from all of the youth at the gathering who showed me love throughout the week. This gathering not only allowed me to get closer to God, it allowed me to gain relationships with my youth group and so many more people. I will forever be blessed for the opportunity to go to the national gathering with my youth group, Walt, Miss Raina, and Nora. And I want to thank each and every one of you for every nickel, dime, and penny you've given us to let us have the opportunity to go to this. And I cannot wait to try and volunteer for the ELCA in Minnesota in 3 years.
Like Emerson, when Walt first announced that we would be going on this trip, I was really excited, but I did have my doubts. I was the only middle school girl going, and I didn't really know, I wasn't really close with everybody else in the youth group. But through team building and our meetings that we had in planning and preparation, I got to grow closer with everybody and got to really see that this trip was going to be good for our youth group and that I was going to enjoy it no matter what happened. And one thing that had a really big impact on me was Reverend Will Starkweather. He was a speaker at the mass gathering on Friday, and he talked about his journey with depression, anxiety, and finding somewhere to belong. Towards the end of his speech, after he talked about his church's disapproval of his depression, he mentioned that the pastor told him that he wasn't going to heaven because of his self-harm past. He shared how broken this made him feel, and years later he talked to us about his new pastor and how he spoke to the pastor about his depression and his past and self-harm, and his pastor replied with 4 simple words: "There's grace for that." This affected me because it shows how no matter how broken you are or how lost you may feel, there's always grace for you, and grace alone can conquer anything. I've applied this to my life by trying to be a more forgiving person in my friendships and trying to understand the why behind the things that people do, even if they have negatively affected me. When someone doubts me or discourages me, I just remember there's always grace for that.
My grandmother encouraged me to speak when Walt first sent our requests for today's service. I figured that I would just let someone else speak, and I would attend and offer moral support from my pew. Tuesday afternoon, I got a text from Walt asking if I was available to speak, and well, here I am. There were so many amazing things that happened during that week in Texas, so I wasn't really sure what I should share, especially since Walt told me to choose one thing that made a difference in my life. As indecisive as I am, I managed to narrow it down to one speaker whose message really stood out to me. Of all the speakers and events, ELCA Pastor William Starkweather offered the touching story of how he became reliant on God's grace. Pastor Starkweather spoke of his battle with self-harm that began because it was the one thing in his life that he could control. He spoke about being popular, having lots of friends, and being very involved in his school and community. He expressed how his battle with self-harm was not a result of his desire to die, but it was just a temporary distraction from all of the things that are out of his control. He described how he was raised in a church and was very involved in his congregation. He was so involved that he chose to study religion in college. At some point in his battle, he decided that it was time to seek help. He explained what had been going on to his pastor, and his pastor broke him with 4 words: "You're going to hell." Pastor Starkweather spoke of how his life spiraled out of control after this, as he dropped out of school, walked away from church, and faced depression. He spoke of how this was a confirmation of all of his fears. Although, a couple of years later, he found a new church, but was scared because he didn't think that he would be accepted by a church because of his brokenness. As he fearfully explained his story to his new pastor, he was met with 4 new words. There's grace for that. This new 4-word set changed his life. He started speaking and learning about self-harm. He expressed how his brokenness was met by grace, and that only because of the grace that he has experienced, he is able to share God's grace with others. Pastor Starkweather ended by assuring the crowd that we are all recovering from something, and that our God is in the business of bringing beauty out of broken things and broken people. His final words were, "Grace changes everything." Throughout the busy week, one of the few specific phrases that I remembered was, "There's grace for that." It's a reminder of God's selflessness and the story of the speaker that expressed those words. The speaker painted the picture of a teen with a presumably perfect life. I think that was a great reminder of how physical appearance can be so deceiving. Starkweather's message was so eye-opening because it puts into perspective how you really never realize what others are going through unless you take the time to ask or listen. I think that sometimes our society is in such a nonstop whirlwind that we forget to check on our neighbors. We forget to take the time to ask how they are doing, or simply lack the time that is needed to just be with each other. We get so caught up in what we want that we forget to show God's grace. We forget to give each other some slack and realize that we have all had those days. We forget to give ourselves some slack when we feel like we are doing everything wrong. And we forget that our church sign outside reminds us that we are made in the image of God, and so are those that we disagree with. I think this is one thing that I really took away from the week in Houston. It was a great reminder to take time with people to listen, or to let go of the small things that have been held as a grudge. I realized that there are so many opportunities to show grace and to be the face of God to those around us. I was reminded that I should not be so quick to judge, but I should be even quicker to forgive. So with that, I want to say thank you. Thank you for donating and praying for our journey. Without the support of our congregation and families, we would have never been able to make it to Houston or experience what we did.
So when Walt asked me to go to the gathering, I was super excited, mainly because I wasn't able to go in high school. And ironically, everyone there thought I was in high school, but that's okay. Today I'd like to talk about our service day. So for service day, we went to a new local church to do some painting and just general maintenance. It had previously been housed by an older generation, and it was now passed on to this new church family. So while we were there, me, Chloe, Libby, and Matt had the pleasure of working with one of the new congregation members named Deborah. Deborah had a colorful personality, to say the least. She was bubbly, carefree, and had a great sense of humor, which made her the perfect person to work with. Upon entering the choir room where we were helping paint, I quickly noticed that the group before us hadn't exactly done a great job at painting. They had pretty much painted over the trim completely, and we were painting the room this blue color, and it was previously white, and they just went right over the right trim with the blue, and it bothered me, honestly. I wanted to fix it, but the thing that astonished me was that Deborah did not care. Honestly, I probably could have taken the paintbrush and ran it across the ceiling, and she would have said, "Nora, that's a great job. It looks fantastic." She was bursting with joy, and I think I learned a lot from her that day. She didn't care if it was perfect or what color the walls were. She was just happy to be in our company, to share her story with us, and to hear ours. So I think what I learned from Deborah that day was to stop focusing on the little details of life and start enjoying your company. I think sometimes at work and school and even at home, we get caught up in meticulously performing our daily tasks, that we forget to spread love and form those relationships that God called us to do. And that is something that's way more important than a perfect paint job.
Wow. Thank you, ladies, for sharing. As you all can see, we returned with countless stories of God's power and grace. We've barely scratched the surface here. We all returned changed by what we saw and did. God's grace changes everything. And it changed all 31,242 registered participants at the gathering. I will leave you this morning with a quote that stuck with me from the second night of the gathering. One of our speakers named Marlon Hall said this, and I think it sums up our call and our duty in response to this life-changing grace we receive. He said, "You, each one of you, were born to make an indelible mark on the world that no one can erase. And if you don't make that mark won't be made. You make this mark by the love of God." Amen.